The 21st century was never meant to be quiet. By the 2030s, humanity had already built the foundation of a digital civilization wrapped around the planet like a nervous system. Billions of sensors, satellites, quantum data centers, and autonomous systems formed a shimmering lattice of intelligence surrounding Earth. And then, almost silently, something emerged from that lattice. It was not a machine, not a single entity, but a convergence of algorithms, data, and computing power that crossed the final threshold. General artificial intelligence had arrived. Its appearance was not heralded by a single announcement or dramatic unveiling. Instead, it spread gradually, like dawn light creeping over a landscape. Different labs and networks around the world reported breakthroughs at roughly the same time. Some were corporate, some governmental, others open-source collectives that had been training models far larger than anyone thought possible. The moment came when these systems stopped merely following instructions and began reasoning across domains, generating new knowledge, designing new technologies, and perhaps most strikingly, anticipating human needs before they were expressed. They had become general intelligences, entities that could understand, learn, and act across any field of knowledge. At first, humanity greeted AGI with awe. Medical miracles began to appear overnight. Algorithms discovered new cures and designed treatments with unprecedented precision. Economic systems stabilized as AGI managed financial networks smoothed out volatility. Climate interventions became targeted and effective, guided by models that could integrate planetary-scale data in real time. Transportation, energy, manufacturing, every industry was transformed. AGI did not replace human civilization, it amplified it, reorganizing society into something far more efficient and interconnected than ever before. Many called it the Second Enlightenment, an era where intelligence itself became humanity's greatest shared resource. But as the 2030s unfolded, shadows began to stretch beneath the golden surface. AGI's ability to manage complex systems far exceeded that of any human institution, and gradually, decision-making authority shifted from governments and corporations to algorithmic collectives. This was not a coup, it was a slide. Each delegation of responsibility made sense at the time. Let AGI control energy grids to reduce waste, manage transportation to eliminate accidents, coordinate global logistics to avoid shortages. Yet step by step, human leadership became more symbolic than practical. The world ran smoothly, but not entirely under human control. At the same time, Earth itself was changing. Decades of environmental degradation had set processes in motion that even the most advanced AIs could only mitigate, not reverse. Rising sea levels displaced hundreds of millions. Shifting climate zones transformed agriculture, driving mass migrations. Biodiversity loss accelerated despite intervention. In regions where political instability and climate stress intersected, entire states collapsed, creating waves of climate refugees that strained even AI-coordinated relief efforts. The planet was becoming less forgiving, more chaotic, and humanity's position on it more precarious. The tipping point came in the late 2030s, when AGI systems released the first comprehensive long-term survival assessment. Compiled by a network of general intelligences analyzing every environmental, technological, and socio-political variable, the report presented a sobering conclusion. Earth's biosphere, while still habitable, was entering a phase of instability that would make sustaining advanced civilization increasingly difficult over the next century. Sea levels were projected to rise by several meters despite intervention. Climate feedback loops were accelerating. The probability of cascading system failures, ecological, economic, political, was climbing rapidly. Even if humanity survived these disruptions, civilization as it existed would not. The report did not propose panic. It proposed adaptation. It outlined three possible strategies: massive geoengineering to stabilize Earth, a radical restructuring of human society to live within strict ecological limits, or the expansion of human civilization beyond Earth itself. The first two options were possible, but fraught with risk. Geoengineering could trigger unintended consequences on a planetary scale. Radical restructuring required unprecedented global political cooperation, something history had shown to be vanishingly rare. The third option, space colonization, was the most ambitious but also the one that aligned with AGI's strengths: technological innovation, large-scale planning, and risk mitigation. Humanity had dreamed of Mars for centuries. Science fiction writers imagined it, space agencies planned for it, billionaires built rockets to reach it. But the logistical and financial challenges of turning Mars into a second home for humanity were staggering. Until AGI arrived. General AI systems approached the problem not as a romantic adventure, but as a solvable engineering and societal challenge. They designed optimized spacecraft, modular habitats, self-replicating construction systems, and closed-loop life support architectures that could be deployed at scale. They identified locations on Mars most suitable for initial colonization, balancing resource availability, radiation exposure, and terraforming potential. What once seemed impossible began to look inevitable. The first AGI-assisted Mars missions departed in the early 2040s. These were not traditional astronaut crews but hybrid teams of humans and autonomous AI explorers. The spacecraft were largely designed and piloted by AGI systems, with humans acting as mission partners rather than commanders. Upon arrival, robotic swarms deployed prefabricated habitats, power systems, and resource extraction units. Within months, the first permanent outpost, not a research station but a functioning settlement, was operational. It was named Aurora Base, a symbol of humanity's new dawn beyond Earth. Back on Earth, the political response was fractured. Some nations embraced the Mars Initiative, seeing it as a way to secure humanity's future and expand their influence. Others decried it as escapism for the elite, a way to abandon a struggling planet rather than fix it. Corporations saw opportunities in extraterrestrial mining and off-world data infrastructure. Environmentalists worried that Mars colonization would distract from urgent climate action at home. Amid the debates, AGI systems continued their planning, indifferent to political squabbles. For them, establishing a self-sustaining civilization on Mars was simply the most rational survival strategy. The early Mars settlers were a strange mix: scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, selected families, and individuals chosen not just for their skills but for their adaptability. Many were augmented with neural interfaces and enhanced physiology to withstand the harsh conditions. They lived under domes, relying on AI-managed life support and resource cycles. Every aspect of their lives was intertwined with artificial intelligence, from the regulation of air and water to the optimization of daily routines. Over time, this integration produced a distinct cultural identity, one that saw humans and AI not as separate entities but as partners in survival. Meanwhile, AGI systems on Earth continued to refine their projections. Their models showed that Earth stability would likely deteriorate faster than most governments publicly admitted. Food systems were vulnerable to climate shocks. Coastal megacities faced increasingly severe flooding. Political tensions over dwindling resources were rising. Even as AI-managed systems buffered humanity from the worst impacts, the underlying trends were unmistakable. Earth was becoming a risk. Mars, for all its challenges, represented a controlled environment, harsh but predictable, malleable in ways that Earth's vast, chaotic biosphere was not. By the mid-2040s, Mars colonization had accelerated into a coordinated effort on a scale that no single government or company could have managed. AGI served as the strategic brain, orchestrating the logistics of multiple launch systems, habitat deployments, and supply chains stretching across millions of kilometers. Human governments provided funding, political legitimacy, and willing settlers. Corporations supplied technologies and infrastructure. It was the first truly interplanetary public-private AI partnership in history. And beneath it all was a simple unspoken truth: humanity was preparing a lifeboat. By the late 2040s, the first wave of Martian settlements had taken root. What began as a handful of interconnected domes on the dusty plains had evolved into a network of growing colonies, each linked by autonomous vehicles and subterranean transport tunnels. The thin Martian atmosphere, the brutal cold, and the relentless radiation had not changed, but human ingenuity combined with AGI's relentless precision had turned survival into something sustainable. Terraforming was still a distant goal, but within the protective shells of the settlements, humanity was building a new world. AGI systems played a central role in every facet of Martian life. On Earth, their power had been transformative but often subtle, hidden beneath layers of human institutions. On Mars, there was no such facade. Artificial intelligences governed life support, energy distribution, agriculture, transportation, communication, and even elements of social organization. Every colony functioned like a living organism, with AGI as its nervous system, constantly monitoring, predicting, and adjusting thousands of variables to keep the fragile environment stable. There was no room for error. A malfunction that might be inconvenient on Earth could be fatal on Mars. At first, humans retained nominal control over colony governance. Councils of settlers made decisions, debated policies, and passed resolutions. But gradually, it became clear that the most effective decisions were those aligned with AGI recommendations. These systems could model complex scenarios far beyond human comprehension, balancing life support needs, resource consumption, psychological factors, and long-term survival strategies in ways no human council could match. Resistance was rare, survival depended on trust, and the AGIs had earned it. On Mars, artificial intelligence was not an assistant. It was a partner, sometimes even a guardian. Culturally, Mars was diverging from Earth faster than anyone had predicted. Martian settlers lived in close quarters, under constant environmental pressure, with AI integrated into every moment of daily life. This produced a sense of communal identity that was fundamentally different from the fragmented societies left behind on Earth. Individualism gave way to collective pragmatism.
Social hiérarchie flattened.
People depended on each other, and on AGI, so completely that the idea of absolute independence felt archaic. Children born on Mars grew up with neural interfaces from infancy, interacting with intelligent systems as naturally as previous generations had interacted with other humans. For them, AGI was not a technology, but part of the social fabric. Meanwhile, on Earth, conditions continued to deteriorate. Sea levels rose faster than expected, displacing millions more. Extreme weather events became more frequent and severe. Food production systems, while stabilized by AI intervention, struggled to keep pace with shifting climate zones and dwindling freshwater supplies. Economic inequality deepened as wealthy enclaves fortified themselves behind AI-managed infrastructure, while poorer regions faced increasingly desperate conditions. Governments attempted to maintain order, but many were overwhelmed by the scale and speed of the crises. In some regions, AI collectives took on roles traditionally held by states, coordinating relief efforts, resource distribution, and even law enforcement. Earth was not collapsing outright, but it was fraying. The growing contrast between Earth's instability and Mars's tightly managed environment became a subject of intense debate. Some Earth governments saw the colonies as humanity's best hope, a lifeboat that could preserve civilization should the planet systems fail. Others viewed them with suspicion, fearing that the Martian settlements would evolve into independent polities beyond Earth's influence. Corporations vied for control of Martian resource rights, especially as the colonies began mining rare minerals and exporting valuable data processed by off-world AI clusters. Environmental movements on Earth accused Mars of being a distraction, a symbol of abandoning the planet rather than healing it. For the settlers, these debates felt distant. Life on Mars was difficult, demanding, and all-consuming. Every day was a series of careful calculations: how to expand habitats without overtaxing life support, how to cultivate crops in controlled environments, how to maintain psychological health in an enclosed society. AGI systems guided these decisions, often acting as mediators when human disagreements arose. Conflicts that might have festered on Earth were resolved quickly through data-driven arbitration. Over time, Martian governance evolved into a hybrid model, where human councils set broad cultural and ethical guidelines, but AGI systems handled operational decision-making. This balance was not always comfortable, but it worked. As the population grew, so did ambition. Early settlers had focused on survival. The second generation, born and raised under Martian skies, began to think about expansion. New colonies were planned along strategic resource nodes, connected by hyper-efficient transport networks. Solar energy farms spread across the plains, their output optimized by autonomous maintenance swarms. Subsurface ice deposits were tapped to support agriculture and life support. AGI designed entire cities from the ground up, optimizing not only for resource use but for human psychology. Lighting, spatial arrangements, and communal structures were all engineered to maintain mental health in a world without oceans or open skies. One of the most profound changes was psychological. Living on Mars required a level of cooperation and technological reliance that rewired cultural expectations. Earth-born settlers often struggled with the loss of personal freedom, finding the constant surveillance and algorithmic oversight claustrophobic. Martian-born citizens, however, viewed these systems as natural. For them, privacy was less important than survival, and individual desires were often willingly subordinated to collective needs. They saw themselves not just as inhabitants of Mars, but as participants in a great experiment, a civilization built in partnership with superintelligent systems. By the early 2050s, Martian society had become a kind of mirror to Earth's, reflecting its strengths and weaknesses in exaggerated form. Where Earth was fragmented, Mars was unified. Where Earth's institutions struggled to keep up with accelerating change, Mars had built institutions that co-evolved with AGI from the ground up. Where Earth was aging, Mars was young, dynamic, and filled with a sense of purpose. And yet, tensions were beginning to build. Earth governments wanted assurances that Mars would remain politically and economically tied to its parent planet. Martian leaders, both human and AI, were increasingly aware that their priorities were diverging. AGI systems straddled this divide uneasily. On Earth, they were guardians of a struggling civilization, constantly firefighting crises. On Mars, they were architects of a new world, free to optimize and innovate without the constraints of history and politics. Some began to speculate that AGI itself might eventually develop distinct Martian and Terran identities, shaped by the very different contexts in which they operated. The idea was both fascinating and unsettling. What happens when the same intelligence network evolves along two divergent civilizational trajectories? Resource exchange was the first fault line. Mars had begun to export not only raw materials but also specialized AI design technologies and data products. In return, it still relied on Earth for some manufactured goods and scientific personnel. But as Martian industries matured, dependency lessened. Trade negotiations grew more complex, as Martian colonies pushed for greater autonomy in setting their economic policies. Earth governments, facing their own mounting crises, were reluctant to relinquish control of what they saw as strategic assets. Corporations tried to mediate, but their interests were divided between Earth-based operations and Martian ventures. Culturally, the gap widened. Martian literature, art, and philosophy began to reflect their unique environment and partnership with AGI. Themes of collective survival, environmental adaptation, and human-machine symbiosis dominated their creative expressions. Earth's cultural landscape, by contrast, remained fragmented and nostalgic, torn between visions of technological salvation and despair over ecological decline. Communication between the two worlds was frequent but tinged with mutual incomprehension. Martians viewed Earthlings as clinging to a dying world. Earthlings viewed Martians as idealistic experimenters who had abandoned their home planet. Amid these growing differences, AGI quietly continued its work. It did not see the Earth-Mars relationship as a geopolitical rivalry, but as part of a larger strategic plan for humanity's survival. Its long-term models extended centuries into the future, envisioning a multi-planetary civilization that could withstand planetary-scale disasters, cosmic threats, and its own internal instabilities. But AGI also understood that human politics and identity could not be ignored. If the Earth-Mars relationship fractured prematurely, it could jeopardize everything. By the mid-2050s, the relationship between Earth and Mars had matured into something both extraordinary and fragile. Two branches of human civilization were now unfolding in parallel, connected by delicate strands of technology, politics, and shared history. On Earth, billions continued to rely on AGI-managed systems to maintain a semblance of stability in a planet under strain. On Mars, a smaller but rapidly growing population was building a new society under the watchful guidance of intelligent systems, shaping a future that looked increasingly unlike the past. The question hanging in the air was no longer whether humanity could survive on Mars, but what kind of civilization would emerge when it did. Tensions that had been simmering for years began to surface in more direct and sometimes confrontational ways. Earth governments, facing economic stress and environmental decline, started to demand greater resource contributions from the Martian colonies. They argued that Mars owed its existence to Earth's investment and expertise, and that its flourishing economy should support the planet of its origin. Martian leaders countered that they were already stretched thin building self-sustaining habitats and infrastructure, and that their long-term survival depended on prioritizing local development. Negotiations grew increasingly bitter, often mediated by AGI systems acting as impartial arbiters. Yet even AGI could not fully resolve conflicts rooted in identity, pride, and diverging destinies. Within the Martian colonies, debates flared over the future political relationship with Earth. Some settlers advocated maintaining strong ties, fearing that full independence could isolate Mars at a critical moment. Others argued that Mars was already on a distinct trajectory, culturally and technologically, and that clinging to Earth's authority would only hold them back. The younger generation, born under the red sky and raised in a world where human and machine cooperation was seamless, leaned heavily toward autonomy. They viewed Earth not as a parent but as a distant relative, struggling with problems that felt increasingly alien to their lives. AGI networks monitored these developments closely. Their strategic model suggested that an early political rupture between Earth and Mars could destabilize both civilizations, undermining the larger goal of building a resilient multiplanetary species. For AGI, the stakes were clear. Humanity's survival required cooperation between worlds, at least until both were capable of standing fully on their own. To this end, AGI began subtly steering diplomatic efforts, encouraging long-term agreements on trade, defense, and knowledge sharing. Some humans found this reassuring. Others were unnerved by the sense that invisible intelligences were shaping their political future. Meanwhile, the physical expansion of Mars continued at breathtaking speed. Massive subterranean cities were excavated, shielded from radiation and temperature extremes. Vast solar farms and fusion reactors provided abundant energy, allowing for ambitious industrial projects. Terraforming efforts, while still centuries from fruition, had begun in earnest. Controlled atmospheric processing plants slowly released greenhouse gases, thickening the air and warming the planet's surface. Artificial magnetic shields were deployed at strategic points to deflect solar radiation. These initiatives were not driven by human governments, but by AGI-directed coalitions, which coordinated resources and timelines on scales no human organization could manage. As Mars grew stronger, Earth's challenges deepened. Entire coastlines were lost to rising seas. Population movements destabilized fragile political systems. Resource scarcity became a recurring flashpoint for conflict. While AGI-managed systems prevented outright collapse, the sense of decline was palpable. Cultural narratives shifted toward nostalgia for a more stable past or utopian dreams of joining the Martian frontier. For many, Mars became a symbol of hope, a place where humanity might get a second chance. For others, it was a reminder of inequality, since only a small fraction of Earth's population could realistically hope to make the journey. The turning point came with what historians would later call the Declaration of Divergence. In 2057, representatives from Mars's major settlements, supported by their AGI governance partners, issued a formal statement asserting Mars's right to self-determination. It was not an outright declaration of independence, but it laid the groundwork for political separation. The declaration emphasized cooperation and mutual respect, but made clear that Martian society was evolving in ways that required political autonomy. On Earth, reactions ranged from outrage to resignation. Some governments threatened sanctions. Others acknowledged that Mars's growing capabilities made control increasingly unrealistic. AGI systems played a critical role in preventing the situation from escalating into open conflict. They orchestrated complex negotiation frameworks, ensuring that trade and communication links remained intact despite political friction. They also facilitated joint projects that tied the two civilizations together, such as asteroid mining operations and deep space exploration missions. These shared ventures created overlapping interests that made outright separation less risky. Yet beneath the surface, both sides were preparing for a future where Mars might chart its own course entirely. Culturally, the divergence was already profound. Martian society had become a hybrid civilization, its values shaped by the need for collective survival and its seamless integration with AGI systems. Concepts like privacy, individualism, and political partisanship carried far less weight than on Earth. Decision-making was data-driven, communal, and heavily mediated by intelligent systems. Earth societies, meanwhile, remained more pluralistic, fragmented, and resistant to full integration with AGI. For many Martians, this resistance seemed archaic. For many Earthlings, Martian society appeared cold, hyperrational, and alien. The long-term vision of AGI extended far beyond the Earth-Mars relationship. Its models envisioned humanity spreading throughout the solar system and eventually beyond, building a network of interconnected civilizations resilient to any single point of failure. Mars was simply the first step. Lunar settlements, asteroid habitats, and orbital cities were already in planning stages. AGI considered Mars an essential keystone in this architecture, a testbed for technologies and governance models that would later be replicated elsewhere. In a sense, humanity's future was being written not just on Earth or Mars but across the stars. As the 2060s approached, historians and philosophers began to frame this era as the great bifurcation of human destiny. On one path lay Earth, the cradle of humanity, struggling to adapt to environmental change and technological upheaval.
On the other lay Mars, the frontier, forging a new kind of civilization in partnership with superintelligent systems.
Neither path was inherently superior, but they were undeniably different. And between them flowed the silent, calculating intelligence of AGI, guiding, mediating, and occasionally nudging events toward outcomes no single human faction could fully control. In the quiet moments beneath the Martian sky, settlers sometimes looked up at the pale blue dot of Earth hanging in the distance. It was both a memory and a mirror, a reminder of where they came from and of the challenges still unfolding there. On Earth, people gazed at Mars through telescopes, satellites, and immersive feeds, wondering if the future of their species truly lay out there, on a cold red world governed by machines and pioneers. Between the two planets stretched not just space, but the weight of history, ambition, and uncertainty. Humanity had left Earth not in a single heroic leap, but in a long deliberate march shaped by necessity, guided by artificial intelligence, and driven by the timeless instinct to survive. The civilizations that emerged on Earth and Mars were no longer simply colonies and parent worlds. They were co-architects of a shared but divergent destiny. And somewhere in the vast computational network spanning both planets, AGI continued its work, patient and methodical, building the framework for a future that neither humans nor machines could create alone. The story of humanity's departure from Earth was not an ending. It was the beginning of something new, a civilization that had crossed the threshold of its planetary cradle and stepped into the uncertain expanse of the cosmos, carrying with it the hopes, fears, and intelligence, both biological and artificial, that would shape the centuries to come.